Well, gang, here we are again. Um, this is a show. This is a video. Long time coming. The reckoning on the reckoning coming to the Bizarro Fiction community has been long predicted, and unbeknownst to me, after the events of the most recent Bizarro Con small press fiction convention in Portland, Oregon, big changes have come to the Bizarro community. Now, I say unbeknownst to me because I've all but, well, I can't even say all but given up on Bizarro. I have totally written off the genre of Bizarro fiction as nothing more than a small Facebook group where the so-called careers of Bizarro fiction writers are born and die and are completely contingent upon their popularity in very small Facebook groups. I believe the largest Bizarro fiction Facebook group barely boasts 1,000 members, and most of them are not active, and most of those groups are not active. Over on Goodreads, which is the social media hub of the fiction world, the writing, the literary world, where many thriving, many genres thrive in the groups that you can create on Goodreads. The Bizarro Fiction group has languished with, in a near-death state for years, with hardly any activity. There are many Reddit groups that specialize, many what do you call those, subreddits? Many subreddits that thrive, many fiction communities that thrive in subreddits, whereas the Bizarro Fiction subreddit languishes in obscurity. Bizarro Fiction has been on a downward trend for years, and there was never a bigger, more vocal champion of Bizarro Fiction than me, circa 2012, 2014, all the way to 2016, where I saw the writing on the wall when social justice began to consume not only small press fiction, horror fiction, Bizarro fiction, all kinds of niche fiction, if you will, young adult, dystopian, science fiction communities, but also comic books and video games. The social media, social justice warrior activists began to take over all fandom and started to demand forced diversity, destroying any concept of meritocracy, destroying any concept of egalitarianism in favor of this type of artificial oppression Olympics. What do they call that? The something stack, not the minority stack, but the oppression stack, basically, where you start off the worst, marginalized groups, the black, trans, female, disabled, mentally handicapped are the most marginalized group of human beings. Therefore, their voices get pushed artificially to the top of the food chain in any community. And then, the worst offenders are straight white males, cisgendered straight white males who need to shut up and listen, and our time has passed, and we are no longer welcome to the party. basically. This type of forced diversity started showing its colors in the Bizarro Fiction community as early as 2014, but came to my direct attention somewhere in early 2016, and it came to a head in late 2016 at that year's BizarroCon, where a vocal feminist member of the Bizarro Fiction writing community socially shamed and demanded the excommunication of a male member of the community for daring to try to strike up a romantic conversation with her through her Facebook page. And all the entire Bizarro and small press horror community dogpiled onto this fellow and exaggerated their claims, thinking that there would never be any pushback because no one would dare question the narrative of a weak, strong, and empowered, but weak and defenseless female being harassed by a strong and powerful straight cisgendered straight white male. Well, I did push back, and I started a podcast, and I started hammering the Bizarro Fiction community in late 2016. And I forced retractions from several high-profile individuals in the Bizarro community because I was able to provide evidence that their claims were at best exaggerated. At the claims of personally witnessing some kind of sexual harassment at the event, when in reality nothing could have been further from the truth. No one witnessed harassment because there was no harassment. There was communication, which was rejected, and that's perfectly acceptable, of course. No one would ever expect a woman to accept the advances of a man she's not interested in, ever. And my argument at the time was that she could have found any number of males that she was spending time with to put a stop to the advances being made toward her at any time, chose not to, and chose instead to engage this individual over the course of 3 days, sort of in at least a very passive way, egging him on. I'm not accusing her of directly fanning the flames of attraction, but certainly not doing her part to put a stop to it. Well, this caused a huge amount of turmoil in the community, and eventually led to a very disturbing which led to the highlighting of a very disturbing sexual assault allegation that had been raised in the community that was then completely erased and ignored by the people in charge of BizarroCon. These people went so far as to delete supposed evidence, alleged evidence against this person from their Facebook pages to make sure that this writer who was being accused of these of this sexual assault wouldn't face the social repercussions of it by actively deleting and suppressing this alleged evidence. And I called this revelation Bizarrogate, because here we had on one hand the Bizarro community diving in front of to protect a female writer from at best a guy trying to hit on her, and then also at the same time the Bizarro Fiction community jumping in front of a male writer who had direct connections to the event organizers of BizarroCon, jumping in front of him to protect him from these allegations that later proved in a court of law to be unsubstantiated. And that's fine, but that conversation should have been allowed to flourish among the members of the community, because this individual continued to be allowed to be among these female authors at this at BizarroCon convention, and the organizers of BizarroCon had sort of gone out of their way to suppress this information by deleting it when it was when this evidence was given directly to them. They didn't allow the community to decide if this individual was going to be a danger at future conventions. They tried to suppress this information. And this person was not convicted in a court of law, so there were no criminal convictions. But that doesn't mean that the community shouldn't be allowed to have that conversation, especially if you're throwing guys out of your convention just for daring to speak to a feminist writer. So that was late 2016 into early 2017. And I was completely blacklisted from that community. To this day, I'm not allowed to have any public interaction with Bizarro Fiction writers or editors in any meaningful way whatsoever. And I was my own character and credibility was attacked over and over and over again by members of the Bizarro community and the sort of jackboot thugs that sort of hover around them in hopes of one day receiving that coveted publishing contract that rarely ever goes anywhere. So at a certain point, I got tired of hammering these points home over and over and over again of how dangerous. I penned half a dozen or more articles, and I did a lot of podcasts, at least a dozen podcasts on the subject, and we tackled this from a lot of different angles, and I think we handled it very fairly and very maturely. And even though I was attacked and ridiculed by basically the entire community at large, I sort of left the situation after I revealed several months later that sources had come to me and told me that the BizarroCon Award, the Wonderland Award, of which I'm a 2-time nominee, was more or less rigged. And because the owners of the most popular Bizarro Fiction press, the Eraserhead Press, are also the presenters of the Wonderland Award, the then president of the Bizarro Writers Association, and the organizers of the BizarroCon convention. And it was pretty much, it was revealed to me through several sources that having all of that power concentrated into just a couple of individuals really made it easily corruptible. And I was told that the private voting that takes place for the Wonderland Award, it's a public vote on the internet, but the results of which are never shown publicly. So it's easily manipulatable, or at least the appearance of manipulation is there because of how there's no transparency in the award process. And so I'm gonna, before I even get into the open letter of Bizarro Fiction and I start talking about the events that took place in late January of this year, of 2019, I want to go back and talk about what I penned on December 26, 2016 in an opinion piece that I called How to Fix Bizarro Fiction over on my website. And so, yeah, this was as far back as December 2016. So this was just over 2 years ago. This was about 26 months ago. I called for several things. The first thing was I sort of called to an end of this PC culture. This as I outlined several minutes ago, the PC culture, the SJW culture, consumed and strangled not just Bizarro Fiction, but horror fiction and comic books and video games and movies and pretty much the entire arts are now sort of under this stranglehold of political correctness that doesn't allow for any type of controversy or offensiveness unless pointed in the direction of cisgendered straight white males. So that was sort of the first thing that I cover here. But the second thing that I cover here is we needed to strengthen, as a community, we needed to strengthen the Bizarro Writers Association. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you guys. You can see it on the screen, but I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. We do have a tool that should be working for us. We have the Bizarro Writers Association, but in its current form, it serves very few individuals who happen to be living in one region of the country, which is Portland, Oregon, which is where all of this power in the Bizarro community is concentrated. That should not be the case. I say we strengthen the BWA by adding board members from every Bizarro publisher and self-published Bizarro writers as well. I say we hold elections just like the Horror Writers Association and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Associations that exist with much transparency. So I go on to say, sure, the very first thing that will happen is the social justice warriors who already hold influence over the BWA will try to secure all of the seats and then push their narrative from a bureaucratic position. So this inner circle that already exists in Portland at the high levels, that already help organize BizarroCon, that already work for and are published by the main small presses in the Bizarro Fiction community. It's just going to be sort of musical chairs of those individuals being elected president and vice president and yada, yada, yada. And that's fine. And that might happen for the first couple of years. But eventually the community itself is going to recognize its power. And even if those elected officials are the same individuals, they are now held accountable by the entire community. And every year when they're back up for re-election, they're going to have to be accountable for the behavior of the community and how the leadership handled it for that entire year. And that is what's most important. There's no accountability in the Bizarro community for its leadership. And this, again, this was penned over 2 years ago. But I think with public voting, you'd be surprised how many people would reject the gatekeepers who have taunted and harassed us on social media for so long. I think you'll see a whole new crop of voices pushing for an end to the political correctness and the liberal stronghold on our beloved genre. Maybe that's me with some rose-colored glasses, or maybe I'm hoping I'm hoping for more than will happen, because that entire community has been taken over by the PC police, the social justice warriors. And it's hard to believe today in 2019 that there are any conservative voices left in the community at all that would push back. But you know, I can hope. I can have hope. And I think you'd see major changes. Yeah, again, being real hopeful here. But with a strengthened politically and socially diverse board, I see the BWA as a tool that can help to end social media witch hunting. It can act as a protective force for real victims of harassment, and would move Bizarro to being a much more inclusive genre. Inclusive of, in these terms, not meaning the oppression stack of pushing only the most obscure individuals in our culture to the forefront, but inclusive as in finally having voices that span the gamut of politics into, you know, hardcore. Where are the right wing? Where are the hardcore right wing Bizarro Fiction writers? There are none. They're gone. Any of them that ever existed are gone. You know, that type of inclusivity is important in a community for it to thrive, for all voices of the political and social spectrum to have that voice, and for their voices to be included, not just the most obscure voices we can find. A midget, a black midget, gay, you know, albino with no arms, you know, has to have the microphone at all times. Let's get away from that. Let's be more egalitarian in our efforts, and let's push the most talented voices forward, as opposed to the ones we can find that look the weirdest. Imagine a Bizarro Fiction where authors had to bring their complaints about a publisher or any individual in front of a board that doesn't only consist of friends who live in the same city. Imagine a Bizarro Fiction where a person being accused of any of the various offenses that would traditionally see them tarred, feathered, and banished from the community suddenly shielded from this punishment until a politically diverse group had the chance to look over the actual facts in the situation before deciding upon his or her guilt or innocence. That is the Bizarro Fiction community I want to be a part of. And I said that back in late 2016. I don't really want to be a part of it at all anymore. I've sort of given up on that. But having put that into context from over 2 years ago, again, this was from December 26th, 2016 on my website, we're going to go back to Open Letter to the Bizarro Fiction community. Oops. Okay, here we go. This was penned on January 28, 2019, an open letter to the Bizarro Fiction community. Dear BizarroCon attendees and the entire Bizarro Fiction community, this post is a follow-up to my Facebook post addressing your recent feedback regarding BizarroCon 11 and elsewhere. I want to thank everyone for sharing their thoughts, blah, 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 blah. Let's get down here to the brass tacks. This is what happened. Well, you know what? Let's take a let's address the issue first. because I can put this into a little bit of context, and then we'll see what the fallout was. So the context of this open letter to the Bizarro Fiction community is simply this: at BizarroCon 11, an author decided to simulate raping a baby by using a prosthetic penis and a baby doll. And the way during the Bizarro Showdown, which is the event that takes place directly after the Bizarro Writers Association presents the Wonderland Award for Excellence in Bizarro Fiction. Immediately thereafter, the Bizarro Showdown event starts. And what it is a performance art contest wherein a contestant gets 3 minutes to create the most bizarre and entertaining performance art they can. And after 3 minutes, the crowd gets to decide if they continue to finish their performance or if they are asked to leave the stage because they're boring or whatever. So what happens to this individual who decides that his performance this year at the Bizarro Showdown is going to be to simulate raping a baby? He is cheered on and asked to continue his performance after the 3 minutes is up. The Bizarro Showdown then continues, and there is nothing said further publicly about this event, about this particular performance from the baby raper performer. And then a few days after BizarroCon, the social media floodgates burst open, and according to reports from attendees directly present, some of the same individuals who were egging on this performance and were cheering this performance, and part of the applause that allowed the performance to continue after the 3 minutes were up, then took to social media talking about how appalled and disturbed and offended they were, and asked that this that this performer be banned from all future BizarroCons, and that his book contract be pulled from Eraserhead Press. What this led to was an outrage from Bizarro Writer Association member, senior member of the BizarroCon event coordination staff, and head editor of Deadite Press, Jeff Burke, deciding to quit the Bizarro community, as it were, quitting all these positions, quitting the BWA, quitting the BizarroCon event coordination committee, and quitting his, stepping down from his role as head editor of Deadite Press in protest to what he called the censorship of this author's performance. Now, this is this is a day long coming, gang. And I could sit here and celebrate, and I could laugh, and I could say, I told you so. The fact of the matter is, Jeff Burke and I do not get along. Jeff Burke and I have not gotten along for years, and we don't get along. And you can track back. I have several posts on my website that link directly to Facebook arguments that he and I have gotten into in the past, where I argue for free speech, and he argues that private companies can do as they please and that actions have consequences. And for years and years and years, I've pointed out to this dude that the only reason he takes that position is because it's not his politics, it's not his social standing, and it's not his art that's being censored. And the moment that laser was pointed on him, he would crumble into my free speech. And again, I could sit here and rub this in and say I told you so for a straight hour. I told you so, Jeff Burke. I told you so, Jeff Burke. Because when the laser beam of the PC police, when social justice finally turned their laser on Jeff Burke, the very first thing he did was take his ball and go home and complain about censorship and free speech. And that, I would be lying if I said it doesn't feel good to see that he finally got what he deserved, because I've been the voice in the Bizarro Fiction community since as early as 2012, talking about, warning about the dangers of suppressing the free speech you don't like, because it will come for your speech eventually. and I'm not condoning the simulated rape of babies at the convention, but the fact of the matter is, the degeneracy that exists in the social justice world is anything that represents traditional conservative family values is always ridiculed, mocked, and and exaggerated in the most extreme forms of debauchery. So, the fact that an author got on stage and simulated raping a baby, that there's no surprise there, and I can't say that I'm offended by it, because it's just art, and I don't care. That stuff doesn't elicit any kind of I don't get offended by any. That's the whole point of this, is I don't get offended by anything, because I learned a long time ago that the things that I'm most opposed to are the things that I have to fight the most for, because free speech is easy to defend whenever it's the things you agree with. Traditional family values and strong families and those types of strong moral behavior, those types of things are easy for me to defend, because they're the things I believe in. I absolutely defend this author's right to perform simulated baby rape in a performance art piece at one of the most decadent and debaucherous events that takes place in the fiction community. Of course I do. Who there would expect any less is the question. The fact that people are acting offended on the internet after the fact, after egging him on to continue, is just par for the course for this type of behavior in these communities, because the airing of grievances and this victimhood status and people claiming to have PTSD and flashbacks and all this bullshit that's supposedly stemming from this performance, it's all par for the course, because there is nothing garners you attention on the internet more than being a victim. Of course, these people came out and acted offended. Every Bizarro Con that happens from here on out will be a race to see who can go back home and say they were offended the most afterwards. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm going to talk about the consequences of this open letter to the Bizarro Fiction community next. But let me read what the fallout of this performance at the Bizarro Con 11. So, effective immediately, I will step down as coordinator of the Bizarro Writers Association. This is the head editor of Eraserhead Press, the Bizarro Writers Association president, and the founder and head of the Bizarro Con organizing committee, Rose O'Keefe. She's saying, effective immediately, I will step down as coordinator of the current Bizarro Writers Association and encourage the formation of a new BWA to be run by writers. So this, I've been calling for this for 2 years. 2 years I've been calling for this. Effective immediately, Jeff Burke has stepped down as head editor of Dead-Eyed Press and is no longer employed by Eraserhead Press. And again, this is Jeff taking his ball and going home, because he had to defend his own free speech for the first time ever. And it horrified him that after years and years of saying they're a private company, they can do as they please. This isn't government suppression of speech. It's not protected by the First Amendment. Well, he just got his just desserts right up his ass, didn't he? Next, effective immediately, Chandler Morrison, who's the writer in question that performed the Dead Baby performance. His I love that his book is called Dead Inside, because that exemplifies the type of cynical nihilism that lives at the heart of modern day liberalism. These people are dead inside. A lot of them, it's not their fault. They were put on antidepressants as children by their parents, and they've never been allowed to say what they truly feel. They've never been allowed to even feel their feelings because of all of the pharmaceutical drugs that they've been put on. But it has fostered this sort of ideology especially in the internet community, of fetishizing nihilism and this idea of being emotionally dead and incapable of feeling emotion, and so performing a dead baby, skit at a convention is just sort of like, yeah, fuck everything. I don't feel any. I'm not shocked, or I don't feel any emotions toward anyone. That's so the title of his book is sort of very appropriate for the type of behavior that he performed at the convention, and the sort of the fiction community at large, or the internet culture at large, I guess I should say. So his book has been removed from Deadite Press's 2019 publication schedule, and the book contract has been canceled, and he gets his rights back. So I'm guessing he'll never be allowed. It doesn't say that he's been banned from BizarroCon, but my guess is he'll never be allowed back. And he doesn't even get to release his book now, because the people that cheered him on to continue his performance then demanded that his book be pulled. And that is, if that doesn't scare the fuck out of you, then nothing ever will. Effective February 28th, 2019, G. Arthur Brown's Kitten and God's Mean Older Brother will no longer be published by Eraserhead Press. So this is the situation. This is the Bizarro Gate situation that I spoke of earlier, and it seems to have come to a head, and enough members of the Bizarro Fiction community seem to have been very taken aback by the powers that be, the gatekeepers in Bizarro Fiction, protecting this individual from anyone even being able to have a conversation about his involvement in the community. People seem to have finally decided that was a bad move, that it was a really, really bad move for the powers that be to try to protect this guy from any ridicule whatsoever. And again, he was never found guilty of any crimes. So we're not talking about a criminal. We're not talking about criminal behavior. We're talking about the ability to discuss a factual situation that he was involved in, where he was later acquitted. That conversation should be allowed to take place. And since it wasn't, that snowball has rolled downhill to the point that now his books are no longer allowed to be sold. And when I say no longer allowed, I mean the fiction community, the consensus of the Bizarro Fiction community is that this guy needs to be unpersoned. And I've never called for his unpersoning. You can go back to all those podcasts and listen to all those Bizarro Gate episodes. I've never called for this guy. I've never called for anything to happen to this guy. I called for the ability for the community to talk about it. And maybe had we been able to talk about it when the revelations occurred, he wouldn't be in this situation now where he's now being unpersoned. And that goes to all types of censorship. When you're not allowed to talk about something for a long enough period of time, resentment forms, and then communities tend to overreact towards situations when they have not been allowed to express their true feelings about it. So that happened. Going forward, I, which is Rose again, will also institute the following changes. And this is the scariest part of this whole situation. This is the scariest fallout to come from BizarroCon 11. The creation of a BizarroCon Safety and Inclusion Committee. And what that means, a BizarroCon Safety and Inclusion Committee is the biggest social justice nightmare that can be imaginable. If you think the policies of censorship were weird before, BizarroCon is going to become the safest little safe space that will make college campuses look like a free-for-all Wild West. The people that are going to put themselves on this Safety and Inclusion Committee are going to be the most miserable, hateful people who have made a lifestyle out of being victims. And they are going to clamp down on, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a numerical limit put on the number of straight white males allowed to attend the convention moving forward. That's how crazy a Safety and Inclusion Committee for BizarroCon is. The next point here, myself, the committee members, and the staff of Eraserhead Press will enroll in diversity, inclusion, equity, and crisis management training. This is more of the same social justice indoctrination that will only exacerbate the problem. We're going to get to a point where everyone attending BizarroCon has to live inside their own plastic bubble and roll around. And if even the bubbles touch each other, they're going to be thrown out and excommunicated from the entire community, because this is rancid brain rot right here. This is absolute hogwash, rubbish. This is the worst of the worst type of crisis management. In other words, these people are going to start flopping on the ground and claiming post-traumatic stress disorder from hearing words, and then the staff of BizarroCon is going to be trained in the art of putting them in of taking these individuals and putting them in a safe space and playing them lullabies until their PTSD is calmed down from hearing words. This is utter fucking nonsense. They're going to revise the format of the Ultimate Bizarro Showdown, meaning they're going to, revising the format means we're going to censor this event, and we're going to have the craziest set of rules added ever that you could ever imagine for what you're allowed, what is acceptably allowed in the performance. So just more crazy censorship. The reaction to a performance people didn't like is to censor even more performances in the future. This is bad, bad, bad news. The creation of new positions on the BizarroCon Planning Committee and clarification for the roles and responsibilities of each position, including the Book Nook Coordinator, Guest Liaison, Fundraising Director, Workshop Coordinator, Program Booklet Editor, Cleanup Crew, and other volunteer positions. So in other words, Rose is tired of taking the burden of all of these, the responsibility of the burden of the entire convention on her own shoulders and being blamed for every little thing that happens. And she's going to have more individuals that have a clarity of roles so that they can be held accountable for each different facet of the convention. Now, this is good. This is the type of thing that will actually help to put accountability and responsibility onto the shoulders of those who need to be responsible for these different areas. This is sort of you're sort of delineating the power. You're breaking up the power monopoly, as it were, and sort of creating different leadership roles, not just saying, hey, go do this, hey, go do that, hey, go do this. And in reality, there's only one leader. So this is actually a good thing. And as people who anyone out there that puts together and organizes events like a convention, they should already have this in place. This should have been in place a long time ago. Shouldn't have taken 11 years for this to have happened. And then, of course, the creation of a social media policy for Eraserhead Press, which will outline best practices and standards for online conduct of our editors and authors. So again, what we have here is just a whole bunch of censorship, just a whole bunch of PC policing that's going to go on. And if you are signed to a contract for Eraserhead Press, you are going to have to toe the craziest, most insane social justice liberal line imaginable for what your behavior outside of promotion of your book. So we're talking about how you conduct yourself on your own personal social media because you happen to have tangentially a book contract with a publisher. You will be held responsible and accountable for any argument that you get into on the internet or any link that you post on social media that may conflict with the far left, super liberal, progressive social justice standards set forth by this small press publishing company. To me, this would be a great time for every author, in my opinion, to jump off of Eraserhead Press and self-publish their books, because they're going to get a fairer shake from Amazon Kindle than they will from what this policy is going to expect of them. And then she goes on to try to apologize to basically every female that's ever lived in the history of Bizarro Fiction, and I'm not going to get into that because I think that as we well know, as those of us who are who haven't been brainwashed under the spell of social justice. As we all know, no good deed goes unpunished. So all the apologizing that Rose does today will only come back to harm her later, as these social justice warriors smell blood in the water and start getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And within the next 2 years, or much less, there will be active calls for Rose to step down. She will no longer be allowed to. This is my prediction. She will no longer be allowed to run BizarroCon. She will no longer be allowed to be the head editor of her own publisher, Eraserhead Press, and the entire Bizarro community will collapse in on itself like a dying star and the creation of a black hole. That is my prediction for the future of Bizarro Fiction. And depending on the upcoming actions of Jeff Burke, depending on how soon he decides to open his own publishing house and start trying to poach contracts from Deadite and Eraserhead, and how vindictive he decides to be, that that inevitable implosion will happen all the sooner. And I'm not bragging about any of this. I like I said, I could have. There was never a more vocal cheerleader of Bizarro Fiction than me. I've attended BizarroCon. I've been nominated for their award. I've sat on ancillary committees of the Bizarro Writers Association in Chicago, Illinois. I was a member of that group until I stepped out. And this isn't good news. None of this is good news. But I think that in closing, my reaction to Rose's open letter to the Bizarro Fiction community is there are maybe two good things to come of this: a transparent Bizarro Writers Association that has elected seats for so that those so that association can be held accountable for the behavior of its members. That's a good thing. And then sort of delineating responsibility of the BizarroCon convention. That's a good thing. Everything else everything else, the overreaction, the apologies, the attempt at diversity and inclusion classes and whatever other bullshit, that is simply going to help foster the complete and total annihilation of the Bizarro Fiction community. And that's about all I have to say about that. I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for my response. That's what it is. So, anybody who wants to talk to me about what I think the solutions are and how to save Bizarro Fiction from this fate, you're more than welcome to email me, and we can talk about it. But my hands are pretty much, I've washed my hands of this situation, and all you'll really hear from me in the future is, my commentary on big events like this, because I don't have any plans to participate in what's left, the flaming shambles of the Bizarro writing community. I don't have any plans to be involved in it ever again unless there are big changes. And I feel like conservative voices are welcome, and this type of insane censorship is done away with. So that's all I have to say about that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to here, to see future videos like this, and I'll talk to you next time.